Welcome to Life Stories, where the most heartfelt tales unfold. Today, we bring you an inspiring journey of resilience, hope, and redemption, a story of a young girl named Anna who, despite enduring unimaginable hardships, discovers the healing power of love and kindness. As her life takes a dramatic turn, she reminds us that even in the darkest moments, there's a spark of hope waiting to ignite. Join us as we explore this deeply moving tale of courage and transformation. Subscribe to our channel to begin today's story and embark on this emotional journey with us. Let's begin. The Texas sun burned mercilessly that afternoon, casting its golden, scorching rays over the quiet streets of a modest neighborhood. The air shimmered under the oppressive heat, and even the smallest hint of breeze seemed like a distant memory. The cracked sidewalks lay deserted, save for the occasional sound of distant chatter and the rhythmic hum of cicadas. Anna walked cautiously, her head down, her thin arms tightly gripping a paper bag filled with stale bread. Her small sandals, worn thin from countless miles, barely protected her from the searing pavement, and the oversized dress she wore dragged along the dusty ground. Every step was labored, a mix of fatigue and fear driving her forward. She knew she couldn't return to Diane, her foster mother, without the bread. The consequences of failure were far more unbearable than the sweltering heat. Her arms, already sore from the bruises Diane's temper had left, ached as she tightened her grip on the bag. A twinge of hunger twisted her stomach, but she ignored it. Survival was the only thing on her mind, a quiet, determined resolve to endure. Her brown eyes darted quickly from side to side, scanning the street with the wariness of someone who knew all too well how unkind the world could be. Every face she passed felt like a threat, every alleyway a potential danger. As Anna rounded a corner, her attention was caught by an unexpected sight. A man in an impeccably tailored suit lay crumpled on the sidewalk ahead of her. His neatly combed hair and polished shoes seemed wildly out of place in this humble neighborhood. The glint of his silver watch caught her eye, and she froze in her tracks. For a moment, she considered walking away. What if it was a trap? What if helping this stranger brought even more trouble into her already fragile life? But then her gaze softened. His pale face was drawn, and his chest barely rose and fell with each shallow breath. Memories of people she had seen ignored in moments of need, neighbors who had passed away alone and unnoticed, flooded her mind. Anna couldn't let that happen again. Swallowing her fear, she approached the man cautiously, her heart pounding in her chest. "Sir," she said, her voice trembling as she knelt beside him. "Can you hear me?" There was no response. Her hands, small and trembling, reached out to touch his shoulder. She gently shook him, but his head lolled to one side. The fear within her grew, but so did her resolve. Setting the bread carefully on the ground, she examined his breathing, recalling the basic first aid techniques she had learned by secretly watching lessons through the window of the local school. "He's alive," she whispered to herself, her voice cracking with relief. His pulse was faint but steady, and his breathing, though shallow, was still present. Anna quickly propped his head up with the bread bag and massaged his chest, willing him to wake up. The scorching heat bore down on her, sweat dripping from her forehead, but she ignored it. Moments passed like hours, and just as despair began to creep in, the man stirred. His fingers twitched, and his eyelids fluttered open, revealing piercing blue eyes that slowly focused on her face. He blinked, disoriented, his voice a rasp as he tried to speak. Who are you?" he murmured weakly. Anna's lips trembled, and she quickly wiped the sweat from her brow. "I'm Anna," she said softly. "You fainted." I think it's the heat. Please don't try to get up. Help is coming." His gaze lingered on her for a moment, taking in the bruises on her arms and the cautious yet empathetic expression in her brown eyes. "You helped me," he said, the words barely audible. A small, weary smile tugged at his lips. "Thank you." Anna nodded quickly, her own heart racing with the fear of being noticed. In the distance, the wail of an ambulance siren echoed through the streets, growing louder with each passing second. Panic set in. Diane's warnings about staying out of trouble and avoiding attention blared in her mind like an alarm. "I have to go," she whispered urgently, standing up and brushing the dust from her knees. "You'll be okay now. Just, please don't tell anyone about me." The man, still weak, reached out as if to stop her. But she was already retreating. Her bare feet slapped against the hot pavement as she grabbed the bread and darted into an alleyway. She turned back once, her gaze meeting his for a fleeting moment. It was a look filled with gratitude, confusion, and something else she couldn't quite name. And then she was gone, disappearing into the maze of modest houses. Jacob Reynolds, a prominent businessman and one of the wealthiest men in the country, lay motionless for a moment as the paramedics arrived. They quickly diagnosed his condition as severe hypoglycemia, caused by his habit of skipping meals during busy workdays. As they worked to stabilize him, he recounted the events leading up to his collapse, though his thoughts remained fixated on the girl who had saved him. Who was she? Why had she looked so frightened? As the ambulance prepared to leave, a shrill scream pierced the air, drawing Jacob's attention. It came from a house not far from where he had collapsed. The sound was chilling, a mix of rage and pain that made his blood run cold. "That house," he murmured, his heart sinking as he recognized the direction the girl had run toward. In the modest house, Anna stumbled through the doorway, her small frame colliding with the wall as Diane's rough hand shoved her further inside. The bread spilled from the bag, scattering across the floor. Diane's voice was sharp and venomous as she berated Anna for taking too long. The woman's towering figure loomed over her, eyes filled with fury. Other children in the house watched from the shadows, some averting their eyes, others smirking in cruel amusement. "You think you can embarrass me like this? Taking hours for a simple errand?" Diane's voice was shrill, her words laced with contempt. She crushed the stale bread beneath her heel, the crumbs scattering like Anna's fleeting hope. "I'm sorry," Anna mumbled, her voice barely audible as she tried to hold back tears. But her apology only seemed to fuel Diane's rage. Outside, Jacob watched the scene unfold through the window, his chest tightening as Diane dragged Anna into the kitchen and shoved her against a cabinet. His mind raced, a surge of anger and protectiveness overtaking him. He couldn't walk away, not this time. He owed the girl his life, and he wasn't going to stand by while she suffered. A plan began to take shape in his mind as he leaned heavily on the paramedics for support. Whatever it took, he would get Anna out of that house. She had saved him when he was at his most vulnerable, and now it was his turn to save her. Jacob Reynolds had always prided himself on being a man of action, someone who could navigate the unpredictable tides of life with a sharp mind and unwavering determination. Yet, as he sat in the backseat of his car, his chest still tight from the earlier incident, he felt uncharacteristically helpless. The girl's bruised arms, her frightened eyes, they were etched into his mind, stirring emotions he hadn't felt in years. The ambulance had dropped him off at a nearby clinic to recover, but his thoughts remained rooted in the small, crumbling house where Anna had vanished. It didn't take long for his resolve to crystallize. He couldn't leave her there. The girl had risked everything to save him, and now it was his turn to return the favor. "Take me back to that neighborhood," Jacob instructed his driver, his voice firm despite the lingering weakness in his limbs. "Sir, are you sure that's wise?" "You're still recovering," the driver said, glancing at him through the rearview mirror. "I've made up my mind," Jacob replied, his tone leaving no room for argument. The car glided through the narrow streets, the opulence of its sleek design starkly contrasting with the modest surroundings. Jacob's sharp eyes scanned the rows of houses, each one a faded reflection of the hardships its occupants endured daily. Then he saw it, the house from earlier, its peeling paint and sagging roof mirroring the despair it contained within. Jacob's hands clenched into fists as he stepped out of the car. The late afternoon sun was beginning to dip, casting long shadows across the yard. He approached the house with purpose, his every step fueled by the memory of Anna's terrified expression. He could hear the muffled sounds of shouting from within, and his jaw tightened. Without hesitation, he knocked on the door, the sound reverberating through the quiet street. The yelling stopped abruptly, and moments later, the door creaked open to reveal Diane, her face lined with annoyance and suspicion. Her eyes flicked over Jacob's tailored suit and polished shoes, her expression hardening. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice dripping with thinly veiled hostility. Jacob straightened his posture, his gaze unflinching. "I'm here about the girl," he said, his tone calm but authoritative. Diane's brows knitted together in feigned confusion. "I don't know what you're talking about." Jacob's lips pressed into a thin line. He wasn't in the mood for games. "The girl who saved my life earlier today. I know she lives here. I heard the yelling." Diane's eyes darted to the side, her facade slipping for a fraction of a second before she regained her composure. "You must be mistaken. I don't know any girl like that." Jacob stepped closer, his voice lowering but gaining an edge. "Let's not waste each other's time. I know she's here. And I know what you're doing to her. I can pay you more than you've ever seen, but I want the truth. Now." Diane's expression shifted at the mention of money, the calculation in her eyes impossible to miss. She crossed her arms, leaning against the doorframe as a sly smile crept onto her face. "You're willing to pay for a girl like her? Why?" Jacob held her gaze, his anger barely contained. "That's none of your concern. Name your price." For a moment, Diane seemed to relish the power she held in that instant, her gaze flickering with greed. "Fine," she said finally. $4 million. Jacob didn't flinch. "Done." Her smirk faltered for a moment, clearly not expecting him to agree so quickly, but she recovered just as fast, opening the door wider to let him in. The inside of the house was as dilapidated as its exterior, the air heavy with the smell of mildew and unwashed clothes. Jacob's heart sank as he took in the grim surroundings, his resolve hardening further. Anna was sitting on the floor in the corner of the kitchen, her arms wrapped around her knees as if trying to make herself invisible. Her face was pale, her eyes dull with exhaustion and fear. She flinched as Diane barked her name. "Get up, girl," Diane snapped, grabbing Anna by the arm and yanking her to her feet. "This man says he's got business with you." Anna's eyes darted to Jacob, wide with confusion and fear. Her lips trembled, but no words came out. Jacob took a deep breath, his voice softening as he addressed her. "It's okay, Anna. I'm here to help. You don't have to be afraid anymore." Diane shoved Anna toward him with a harsh laugh. "She's all yours now. I'll have the papers drawn up. Cash or transfer?" Jacob ignored her, his focus entirely on Anna. He extended his hand toward her, his expression gentle. "Come with me. I'll take care of you." Anna hesitated, her gaze flickering between Jacob and Diane. The disbelief in her eyes was evident, as though she couldn't fathom the idea of anyone wanting to help her. Slowly, tentatively, she reached out and placed her small, trembling hand in his. Diane watched the exchange with a mixture of amusement and irritation. "You better not come back complaining," she muttered as Jacob led Anna toward the door. Outside, the golden light of sunset bathed the neighborhood in a fleeting warmth, but Anna barely noticed. Her mind was racing, a storm of emotions she couldn't yet process. As Jacob opened the car door for her, she glanced back at the house one last time. A lifetime of pain and fear stared back at her, and for the first time, she dared to hope that it was finally behind her. Jacob's voice broke through her thoughts. "You're safe now, Anna. No one will ever hurt you again." As the car pulled away, leaving Diane and her decrepit house behind, Anna leaned back against the seat, her hand still clutching Jacob's. She didn't know what lay ahead, But in that moment, she allowed herself to believe in the possibility of a new beginning. The drive back to Jacob's estate was silent, save for the hum of the engine. Anna sat stiffly in the back seat, her eyes darting nervously to the passing scenery, as though expecting Diane or someone worse to appear out of nowhere and drag her back. Jacob noticed her apprehension and spoke gently, hoping to ease her fears. "You don't have to be afraid anymore," he said, his voice calm yet resolute. "No one is going to hurt you." "Anna." She glanced at him, her brows furrowing slightly. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "Why are you helping me? You don't even know me." Jacob hesitated, caught off guard by the raw vulnerability in her question. He sighed, running a hand through his hair as he searched for the right words. "Because I owe you my life," he said finally. "And because no one deserves to live like that. Especially not someone as brave as you." Anna didn't respond. She turned her gaze back to the window, her expression unreadable. But Jacob could see the faintest glimmer of hope in her eyes, like a fragile ember struggling to ignite. When they arrived at the estate, Anna's eyes widened at the sight of the sprawling mansion. Its grand stone facade and immaculately landscaped gardens were a stark contrast to the crumbling house she had called home. She hesitated at the gate, clutching her bag of belongings tightly to her chest as though afraid it might be taken from her. "Come on," Jacob said, offering her a reassuring smile. "This is your home now." She followed him hesitantly, her footsteps hesitant on the cobblestone path. The large oak doors creaked open, revealing a lavish interior bathed in warm, golden light. Marble floors gleamed under the glow of crystal chandeliers, and the air was filled with the faint scent of lavender and polished wood. Anna's gaze darted around the grand foyer, taking in the opulence with a mixture of awe and discomfort. "Mr. Reynolds," a stern voice interrupted from the top of the staircase. Jacob turned to see his mother, Eleanor Reynolds, descending the stairs with an air of authority. She was an imposing woman with sharp blue eyes and a perfectly coiffed silver bob, her every movement exuding control. "What is the meaning of this?" Eleanor demanded, her gaze flickering to Anna with thinly veiled disdain. "Who is this child? And why is she in our home?" Jacob straightened his shoulders, his expression hardening. "This is Anna," he said firmly. "She saved my life earlier today, and she's going to stay with us." Eleanor's eyes narrowed, her lips pressing into a thin line. "Surely you're not serious, Jacob. You can't just bring a stranger into our home. This is highly inappropriate." "I am serious, Mother," Jacob replied, his voice unwavering. "Anna has been through enough. She's staying here, and that's final." Eleanor's gaze shifted to Anna, her expression cold and assessing. "If she's staying, she'll stay in the servants' quarters," she said curtly. "She can't possibly expect to live among us." Before Jacob could protest, Anna spoke up, her voice trembling but firm. "It's okay," she said quietly. "I don't mind. I'm used to it." Jacob's heart sank at her words, but he nodded reluctantly. "Fine," he said, "but only temporarily. Anna will have a proper room once I've made arrangements." Eleanor's disapproval was palpable, but she didn't argue further. She turned sharply and ascended the staircase, her heels clicking against the marble steps. Jacob exhaled, running a hand through his hair as he turned back to Anna. "Come on," he said gently. "Let me show you to your room." He led her down a long hallway to a small, modestly furnished room near the servants' quarters. The walls were bare, and the single window overlooked the garden. It wasn't much, but it was clean and quiet, a far cry from what she was used to. "This is temporary," Jacob assured her. "I'll make sure you're comfortable." Anna nodded silently, clutching her bag tightly as she stepped into the room. Jacob watched her carefully, his heart heavy with a mixture of guilt and determination. He couldn't change the past, but he was determined to give her a future worth living for. That night, as the estate settled into its usual stillness, Jacob sat in his study, poring over documents and making calls. He wasn't just offering Anna a safe place to stay, he was determined to uncover the truth about her past. The bruises on her arms, the fear in her eyes, and the cruel laughter he'd heard from Diane all pointed to a deeper, darker story. And he wouldn't rest until he understood it. Meanwhile, Anna lay in her small bed, staring at the ceiling as sleep eluded her. The soft sheets and warm room felt alien, almost suffocating in their unfamiliarity. She thought about Diane's words, about the cruelty she had endured, and about the strange man who had pulled her from the darkness. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to imagine a life beyond survival. A life where she wasn't just a burden or a target. A life where she could be free. Tears slipped silently down her cheeks. A mixture of fear and fragile hope. She didn't know what lay ahead. But for the first time, she dared to believe it might be something better. The days that followed were a whirlwind of adjustment and unease. Anna remained reserved, navigating the sprawling Reynolds estate like a ghost, careful not to attract attention. Jacob, true to his word, tried to ensure she felt safe and welcome, though he often found himself frustrated by his mother's hostility. Eleanor Reynolds was not a woman accustomed to change, let alone disruptions to her meticulously ordered life. She regarded Anna with thinly veiled contempt, her icy demeanor making it clear she considered the girl an unwelcome intruder. Despite Jacob's repeated reassurances, Eleanor found ways to undermine his efforts, relegating Anna to tasks more suited for servants and ensuring her presence in the house was as invisible as possible. "Jacob, you're being foolish," Eleanor declared one evening, her voice sharp and clipped as she confronted her son in the drawing room. "You have no idea where this girl comes from or what baggage she brings. How do you know she's not manipulating you?" Jacob set his glass of scotch down with more force than intended, the sound echoing through the quiet room. "Manipulating me? She's a child. Mother, a child who's endured things you can't even imagine." Eleanor's lips thinned as she folded her arms across her chest. "And you've already decided to make her your responsibility. Tell me, Jacob, how do you plan to protect her? Or yourself? For that matter, you're too soft." "Soft?" Jacob's voice rose, his frustration boiling over. "You call it softness because you've never cared enough to do the right thing. Anna is staying, whether you like it or not." Eleanor's expression darkened, her jaw tightening as she stared at her son. "Don't come crying to me when this all falls apart," she snapped before storming out of the room. Jacob sighed, running a hand through his hair. It was an exhausting tug-of-war, but he refused to back down. He wasn't going to let Anna slip through the cracks again, no matter what obstacles his mother placed in his path. Upstairs, Anna sat in her room, knees tucked to her chest as she stared out the window. The garden below was bathed in moonlight, its beauty stark against the memories that haunted her. She replayed the events of the auction in her mind, the cold eyes of the bidders, Diane's cruel grip, and the moment Jacob had intervened, his face etched with determination. She still didn't understand why he had chosen to help her. People didn't do things like that. Not in her experience. Kindness always came with a cost, and she had learned to distrust it. But Jacob's actions had been different. His concern genuine. It was a fragile thread of hope, one she clung to despite her instincts screaming otherwise. The door creaked open, pulling her from her thoughts. Jacob stepped inside, his features softening as he took in her small, hunched figure. He carried a tray with a cup of tea and a plate of biscuits, placing it gently on the small table by the bed. "Thought you might like something warm," he said, his voice low and kind. Anna nodded, her movements tentative as she reached for the cup. She cradled it in her hands, the warmth seeping through her fingers and grounding her in the moment. "Thank you," she murmured, barely audible. Jacob pulled a chair closer and sat down, his gaze steady and reassuring. "You don't have to thank me," he said. "I just want to make sure you're okay." Anna didn't respond immediately. She sipped the tea, her eyes downcast as if searching for the courage to speak. Finally, she looked up, her voice hesitant. "Why are you doing this? Why do you care?" The question hung in the air, heavy with the weight of her uncertainty. Jacob leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees as he considered his answer. "Because I know what it's like to feel lost," he admitted, his tone earnest. "To feel like the world has forgotten you. And I don't want that for you. You deserve better." Anna. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears, the vulnerability in his words stirring something deep within her. She wanted to believe him, to trust that his intentions were as pure as they seemed. But trust was a luxury she couldn't afford, not yet. As the days turned into weeks, Anna began to open up in small, cautious ways. She shared fragments of her story with Jacob, stories of hunger, fear, and survival that painted a bleak picture of her young life. Jacob listened intently, his heart breaking with every revelation. He couldn't fathom how someone so young had endured so much. One afternoon, as they walked through the garden, Anna stopped by a patch of sunflowers. She reached out to touch one of the vibrant yellow petals, a faint smile gracing her lips. "They remind me of her," she said softly. "Of who?" Jacob asked. His curiosity piqued. "My mom," Anna replied, her voice tinged with sadness. "She loved sunflowers. She used to say they always found the light, no matter how dark things got." Jacob felt a lump form in his throat. "What happened to her?" he asked gently. Anna's gaze dropped to the ground, her small hands twisting together. "She died when I was little. After that, it was just me and Diane." Her words were like a punch to the gut. Jacob fought the urge to wrap her in his arms, knowing she needed space to process her pain. Instead, he knelt beside her, his voice steady and resolute. "You're not alone anymore, Anna," he said. "We'll find your light again. Together." For the first time, Anna didn't flinch at his words. Instead, she nodded, her smile faint but real. It was a small victory, but it was enough to keep Jacob going. The road ahead was still uncertain. But one thing was clear, Anna's story was far from over. And Jacob was determined to help her write the next chapter. Despite the growing bond between Anna and Jacob, the tension in the house remained palpable. Eleanor's disapproval loomed over every corner of the Reynolds estate, her cold glances and clipped remarks creating an undercurrent of hostility that was impossible to ignore. Still, Jacob refused to yield. He was determined to create a safe space for Anna, even if it meant standing against his own mother. But Anna's journey was far from easy. The weight of her past was a shadow she couldn't shake, and the luxury of the Reynolds estate felt alien, almost suffocating. Every ornate chandelier, polished marble floor, and carefully manicured garden seemed to mock her, a constant reminder of how far removed this world was from the one she had known. It wasn't long before Anna's nights grew restless. She often woke in the early hours, drenched in sweat, her heart racing as echoes of Diane's angry shouts and the cold, unforgiving faces of the bidders haunted her dreams. Jacob would often find her curled up by the window, staring out into the darkness as if searching for something she couldn't name. One such night, Jacob approached her quietly, careful not to startle her. "Anna," he said softly, his voice like a lifeline in the stillness. "You don't have to sit here alone." Anna glanced at him, her eyes hollow and rimmed with dark circles. "I can't sleep," she admitted. "Every time I close my eyes, it's like I'm back there." Jacob sank into the chair across from her, his expression filled with empathy. "Do you want to talk about it?" he asked. For a long moment, Anna didn't answer. She stared out at the moonlit garden, her fingers twisting nervously in her lap. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "It wasn't always bad. Before Diane, I remember my mom. She used to sing to me. She made everything feel safe." Her words hung in the air, fragile and fleeting. Jacob leaned forward, his tone gentle. "What happened to her?" She got sick. Anna replied, her voice cracking. We didn't have money for doctors. After she died, Diane took me in. At first, I thought she cared. But I was wrong. Jacob's chest tightened as he listened. You didn't deserve that. Anna, he said. His voice firm. No one does. Anna's gaze dropped to her hands. Her fingers gripping the hem of her nightshirt. Sometimes I wonder if it was my fault, she confessed. Maybe if I had been better. Stop. Jacob interrupted. His tone resolute. None of this was your fault. What Diane did. What those people at the auction did, it was their choice. Not yours. You are not to blame. Anna blinked. Her eyes glistening with unshed tears. She wanted to believe him. But the weight of her guilt was a burden she had carried for so long it felt like a part of her. In the days that followed, Jacob made a concerted effort to help Anna heal. He introduced small rituals into their routine, reading to her in the evenings, encouraging her to sketch in the garden, and even teaching her how to bake. These simple acts of kindness began to chip away at the walls Anna had built around herself, offering her glimpses of a world she had long believed was out of reach. One afternoon, as they stood in the kitchen covered in flour from a failed attempt at making cookies, Anna laughed, a genuine, unguarded sound that startled even her. Jacob froze, his eyes widening in surprise before a grin spread across his face. Did you just laugh? He teased, playfully tossing a pinch of flour in her direction. Anna giggled again, her cheeks flushing as she swatted at him. Maybe, she admitted, her smile timid but real. For Jacob, that moment was a beacon of hope. It was a reminder that despite everything Anna had endured, there was still light within her, waiting to be nurtured. But not everyone shared Jacob's optimism. Eleanor continued to watch Anna with suspicion, her disapproval simmering just beneath the surface. One evening, as Jacob prepared to take Anna to town for a much-needed outing, Eleanor cornered him in the hallway. Jacob, you're being reckless, she said, her tone sharp. This girl is a stranger. You can't just bring her into our lives and pretend she belongs here. Jacob's jaw tightened as he met his mother's gaze. She's not a stranger. Mother. She's family now. Whether you like it or not. Eleanor scoffed, her lips curling in disdain. Family? Don't be absurd. She doesn't belong here. And deep down, you know it. Jacob took a step closer, his voice low and firm. You don't get to decide who belongs. Mother. Anna has been through enough. If you can't support her, then stay out of her way. Eleanor's eyes narrowed, her face a mask of controlled fury. You'll regret this. Jacob, she warned before sweeping past him, her heels clicking against the marble floor. Jacob exhaled deeply, his frustration mounting. He knew Eleanor's resistance wasn't just about Anna, it was about control. But Jacob was determined to stand his ground, no matter how much it strained his relationship with his mother. As the weeks turned into months, Anna began to find her footing. She started attending a local art class, her sketches evolving into beautiful, intricate pieces that reflected both her pain and her resilience. Jacob couldn't have been prouder, but he also knew there were deeper wounds that art alone couldn't heal. One evening, as Anna sat cross-legged on the floor of the study, working on a drawing, Jacob knelt beside her. Anna, he began, his voice hesitant. Have you ever thought about seeing someone? A counselor? Maybe. Anna looked up, her brow furrowing. You think I need help? She asked, her tone defensive. No, Jacob replied quickly. I think you're incredibly strong. But sometimes, talking to someone who understands can make it easier to let go of the things that hurt. Anna considered his words, her expression softening. Maybe, she said finally, but only if you come with me. Jacob smiled, his heart swelling with pride. Deal. It was a small step, but it was a start. For Anna, the road to healing was long and uncertain, but she wasn't walking it alone. And for Jacob, Every moment with Anna was a reminder of why he had fought so hard to bring her into his life. Together, they were learning to navigate the shadows of the past, one step at a time. Weeks turned into months, and Anna's transformation became increasingly apparent. She smiled more often, laughed more freely, and began to embrace the world she once feared. Yet, despite her progress, the past lingered in her mind like a ghost, casting a shadow over her newfound happiness. Jacob, ever watchful, noticed the moments when Anna grew quiet, her gaze distant as if lost in a place only she could see. He recognized the signs, shadows of memories she hadn't yet shared. He knew the time would come when Anna would need to confront them. But he also understood the importance of letting her take that step on her own. One autumn morning, the crisp air carried the scent of falling leaves, and the Reynolds estate glowed in hues of orange and gold. Anna sat by the window of the drawing room, sketching the vibrant trees outside. The light filtering through the glass cast a soft glow on her face. And for a moment, she seemed entirely at peace. Jacob entered, carrying 2 mugs of hot cocoa. "You're getting really good at that," he said, setting a mug beside her and glancing at the sketch of a towering oak. "Is that the tree by the gate?" Anna nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. "It's my favorite. It feels strong, like it's been through everything but still stands tall." Jacob sat across from her, his gaze thoughtful. "Kind of like someone else I know," he said, watching as Anna's cheeks flushed. "Maybe," she replied softly, tracing the lines of her sketch with her pencil. "But trees don't have memories. They don't have to remember the bad things." Jacob leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Memories can be heavy, Anna," he said gently, "but sometimes sharing them makes them easier to carry." Anna hesitated, her pencil stilling in her hand. She met Jacob's gaze. Her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and determination. "There's something I haven't told you," she began, her voice barely audible. "About the night you found me." Jacob nodded, encouraging her to continue. "Diane didn't just sell me because she needed money," Anna said, her words trembling. She said I was a burden. That no one would ever want me." Jacob's chest tightened. He leaned closer, his voice firm. "She was wrong, Anna. She was so wrong." Anna swallowed hard, tears pooling in her eyes. "It's hard not to believe her sometimes. Even now, I feel like I'm just waiting for the other shoe to drop. Like this life you've given me is too good to be true." Jacob reached out, covering her hand with his. "Anna, listen to me," he said, his voice steady. "You are not a burden. You're brave, kind, and stronger than you know. And nothing Diane said or did changes that." Anna's tears fell freely now, but there was a spark of relief in her expression, as if a weight she had carried for too long was finally lifting. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking. "For everything." Jacob squeezed her hand. "You don't have to thank me, Anna. We're family." Over the next few days, Anna seemed lighter, her smiles more frequent and her laughter more genuine. But Jacob knew there was still one last piece of the puzzle, Diane. He had long suspected that Anna's journey wouldn't truly begin until she faced the woman who had caused her so much pain. It was a difficult choice, but he believed in Anna's resilience. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Jacob broached the subject gently. "Anna," he began, his tone cautious, "have you ever thought about seeing Diane again? Not because you have to, but because it might help you move forward." Anna stared into the flames, her expression unreadable. For a long moment, she didn't answer. Then, she turned to Jacob, her eyes filled with resolve. "I've thought about it," she admitted, "but I'm scared. What if she hasn't changed?" Jacob placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "If she hasn't, that's on her. This isn't about her, Anna. It's about you. And no matter what happens, you won't face her alone." Anna nodded, her lips pressing into a determined line. "Okay," she said, her voice steady. Let's do it. A week later, Jacob arranged the meeting. They traveled to a modest apartment on the outskirts of town, where Diane now lived. The building was drab and uninviting, a stark contrast to the warmth of the Reynolds estate. As they climbed the narrow staircase, Anna's steps faltered, and Jacob placed a steadying hand on her back. I'm right here, he said, his voice calm. Take your time. When they reached the door, Anna hesitated. Her hand hovered over the doorbell before finally pressing it. The sound echoed in the hallway, and moments later, the door creaked open. Diane stood in the doorway, her face lined with years of hardship. She looked at Anna, her expression a mixture of surprise and something else, something softer, almost regretful. Anna, Diane said, her voice thick. You're here. Anna nodded, her chin trembling as she fought to hold her composure. I needed to see you, she said, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions swirling inside her. Diane stepped aside, motioning for them to enter. The apartment was sparse, with little more than a worn couch and a small table. Jacob stayed by Anna's side, his presence a silent anchor. As Anna and Diane sat across from each other, the tension in the room was almost palpable. But Anna didn't flinch. For the first time, she spoke her truth, her voice unwavering. You hurt me, she said, her words deliberate. You made me feel like I was nothing. But I've learned that I'm not. I'm more than what you said I was. Diane's eyes filled with tears, and for the first time, she looked genuinely remorseful. Anna, I'm sorry, she said, her voice breaking. I was wrong. So wrong. The apology was a small step, but it was enough. Anna didn't need Diane's approval or her affection. She had found her strength elsewhere, in Jacob, in herself, and in the life she was building. As they left the apartment, Anna felt a sense of closure she hadn't thought possible. She looked up at Jacob, her eyes shining with gratitude. Thank you, she said softly. Jacob smiled. You did this. Anna, I just stood beside you. For the first time, Anna believed it. She was no longer defined by her past but by the courage it had taken to rise above it. And as she and Jacob walked into the crisp evening air, she knew her story was just beginning. The meeting with Diane had left Anna both emotionally drained and unexpectedly liberated. It was as though she had finally released a storm she'd been carrying within her heart. On the drive back, the silence in the car was heavy yet comforting, a shared understanding between her and Jacob. She leaned her head against the cool window, watching the sun set over the rolling hills, the warm hues painting the sky a soothing balm for her soul. Jacob glanced at her as he drove, his protective instincts sharper than ever. You were incredible back there, he said, his voice calm but full of admiration. Anna turned to him, her eyes thoughtful. It wasn't easy, she admitted, but I needed to do it. I needed to see her, to hear her say those words. Jacob nodded. Closure isn't about forgetting. It's about making peace with what's behind you so you can move forward. Anna smiled faintly. I think I'm finally ready to move forward. Back at the Reynolds estate, the world seemed brighter. The trees swayed gently in the evening breeze, their leaves whispering a soft lullaby. Anna stepped out of the car and took a deep breath, the fresh air filling her lungs with a sense of renewal. She gazed at the house, once an intimidating symbol of a life she thought she didn't deserve, and felt a flicker of belonging. Inside, the warmth of the house enveloped her like a familiar embrace. As Anna settled onto the plush couch in the living room, Jacob brought over a steaming cup of tea, setting it on the table in front of her. The act was simple, yet filled with the quiet care he always extended to her. You've come a long way, Anna, he said, sitting across from her. And you've done it with so much strength. Anna wrapped her hands around the mug, letting the warmth seep into her fingers. I've had help, she said, meeting his eyes with a small smile. You've been there every step of the way. Jacob leaned forward, his expression serious but gentle. You deserve every bit of happiness that comes your way. And you're the one who's chosen to embrace it. That night, Anna lay awake in her room, staring at the ceiling as the events of the day replayed in her mind. Diane's tearful apology, though sincere, hadn't erased the years of pain, but it had softened some of the bitterness. She realized she wasn't the frightened girl Diane had discarded anymore. She was someone stronger. Someone who had learned to fight for herself. The following days were a whirlwind of small victories for Anna. She began painting again, her canvases coming alive with vibrant colors and bold strokes. Each piece told a story of sorrow, resilience, and hope. Jacob encouraged her, often sneaking into the studio to admire her work while she wasn't looking. One morning, Anna decided to paint the oak tree by the gate, the one she had always admired for its strength. She stood before the easel, her brush hovering over the canvas as memories flooded her mind. The oak had been her quiet companion during her darkest days, a symbol of survival. Now, it was becoming a symbol of growth. As she worked, she felt a presence behind her. Turning, she saw Jacob standing in the doorway, his hands in his pockets and a soft smile on his face. "That's beautiful," he said, nodding toward the painting. Anna blushed slightly. "It's not done yet." Jacob stepped closer, studying the strokes on the canvas. "Neither are you," he said, his tone warm. "But you're getting there." The words lingered with Anna long after Jacob left the room. They reminded her that healing wasn't a destination, it was a journey. One she was finally allowing herself to embrace. One evening, as the first snow of the season began to fall, Jacob found Anna in the library, curled up with a book by the crackling fireplace. He handed her a small package wrapped in delicate paper. "An early Christmas gift," he said, grinning. Anna hesitated before unwrapping it, her fingers carefully peeling back the paper to reveal a leather-bound journal. She ran her hand over the smooth cover, her eyes lighting up. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Jacob sat beside her. "I thought you might want a place to put your thoughts, or maybe your sketches." Anna opened the journal, the blank pages filled with possibilities. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft but filled with gratitude. "You've been through so much, Anna," Jacob said, his tone serious. "And I know there's more you haven't shared. But this is for you. A space where you can let it out. In your own time." Tears pricked Anna's eyes, but they were tears of gratitude. "I don't know what I did to deserve someone like you in my life," she said, her voice trembling. Jacob shook his head. "It's not about deserving, Anna. It's about finding the people who see you for who you are and standing by them." That night, Anna sat by the fire long after Jacob had gone to bed, the journal open in her lap. She picked up a pen and began to write, her words flowing freely as she poured her heart onto the pages. It was the first time she had allowed herself to confront her emotions fully, and it felt like a release. When she finally closed the journal, the fire had burned low, and the room was silent. She gazed out the window at the snow-covered landscape, feeling a quiet peace settle over her. For the first time in years, Anna didn't feel lost. She felt found. The journey wasn't over, but she was ready to face whatever lay ahead. With Jacob by her side and a growing strength within her, Anna knew she was no longer defined by her past. She was writing a new story, one filled with hope, love, and the promise of brighter days. Winter settled over the estate, blanketing the grounds in pristine snow. The world seemed quieter now, its sharp edges softened by the season's touch. For Anna, the stillness brought both reflection and a cautious sense of renewal. The frost that once mirrored her own sense of isolation now felt like an invitation to build warmth from within. Each morning began with a walk through the snow-dusted garden. The biting chill against her cheeks reminded her she was alive, and the crunch of her boots on the frozen ground was a rhythm she'd come to savor. Often, Jacob joined her, his tall frame providing a comforting shadow as they strolled. He would point out the way the sun sparkled off icicles or tell stories of winters past, weaving his own childhood memories into her days. One morning, As they wandered toward the oak tree, Jacob paused and knelt to scoop up a handful of snow. "You ever build a snowman?" he asked, his grin mischievous. Anna laughed, a sound that still surprised her with its lightness. "No. It wasn't exactly something I did growing up." "Well," Jacob said, clapping his hands together, "today's the day." He began rolling a snowball, quickly turning it into the base of their creation. Anna hesitated, watching him for a moment before crouching to join in. Her fingers, wrapped in thick gloves, shaped the icy surface with care. Together, they built a lopsided but endearing figure, complete with stick arms and a borrowed scarf. When they were done, Jacob stepped back to admire their work. "Not bad for a first attempt," he said, brushing snow off his gloves. Anna looked at the snowman, its crooked grin made of twigs and stones, and smiled. "It's perfect," she said softly. She hadn't meant the snowman alone. Their shared laughter echoed through the garden, carried by the wind. For Anna, it felt like a piece of her heart, long frozen, had begun to thaw. Inside the estate, preparations for Christmas were in full swing. The staff bustled about, hanging garlands and placing candles in every window. The air smelled of pine and cinnamon, and the sound of carols drifted through the halls. Anna, who had never celebrated the holiday with such fanfare, found herself swept up in the spirit of it all. Jacob insisted on finding the biggest Christmas tree the estate had ever seen. Together, they ventured into the woods, bundled against the cold, to find the perfect one. When they brought it back, Jacob hoisted it into the grand parlor with a triumphant grin. "Now all it needs are decorations," he said, pulling out a box filled with baubles and lights. Anna hesitated, her fingers grazing the edge of a fragile glass ornament. "I've never done this before," she admitted. "First time for everything," Jacob replied, handing her a strand of twinkling lights. "Start at the top." Anna took the lights and began weaving them carefully around the tree's branches. The process was slow, her hands trembling slightly with both excitement and uncertainty. But as the tree came to life with color and light, she felt a spark of joy she hadn't expected. That evening, as the tree glowed softly in the corner, Anna sat by the fire with a mug of hot cocoa in her hands. Jacob joined her, carrying a plate of cookies he'd insisted they bake together earlier, a messy, flour-dusted endeavor that had left them both laughing until their sides ached. "You're starting to smile more," Jacob said, his tone casual but his eyes thoughtful. Anna sipped her cocoa, the warmth spreading through her chest. "I think I'm starting to feel more," she admitted. "It's like I'm waking up after a long sleep." Jacob nodded. "You deserve that, Anna. You deserve every bit of happiness." The holiday passed in a blur of quiet celebration. But it marked a turning point for Anna. She began to see herself not as a visitor in this life, but as a part of it. She explored new interests, gardening, sketching, even learning to play the piano with Jacob's patient guidance. Her laughter became a more frequent visitor, and her silences, once heavy, now held a sense of contentment. One afternoon, as the snow began to melt and hints of spring whispered in the air, Anna stood by the window overlooking the garden. She watched as birds flitted between the bare branches, their songs a reminder that life always finds a way to continue. Jacob approached her, his presence steady as ever. "Penny for your thoughts?" he asked. Anna turned to him, her expression thoughtful. "I've spent so much time looking back," she said, "on what I've lost, on who I used to be. But now I think I'm ready to look forward." Jacob smiled, the kind of smile that felt like sunshine after a storm. "You've already started, Anna. Every day, you're moving forward." She reached for his hand, their fingers intertwining naturally. "I couldn't have done it without you," she said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. Jacob shook his head. "You could have, Anna. You're stronger than you know. I just helped you see it." The warmth of his words settled over her like a blanket. For the first time, Anna felt that she wasn't just surviving, she was living. And she was ready to embrace whatever came next. Together, they turned toward the future, stepping forward into a world full of possibility. As the seasons changed and life at the estate found its steady rhythm, Anna realized that her journey was no longer defined by pain, but by resilience and hope. The garden, now in full bloom, mirrored her own transformation, a vibrant reminder that beauty could emerge even after the harshest winters. With Jacob's unwavering support, she embraced each day, no longer haunted by shadows of the past but inspired by the promise of a brighter tomorrow. On a crisp spring morning, Anna stood at the garden's edge, watching the sunrise paint the sky in hues of gold and pink. Jacob joined her, their hands naturally finding one another's. Together, they smiled, knowing that the path ahead, though uncertain, was theirs to walk together. Life's hardships had taught Anna an enduring truth: love and kindness could heal even the deepest wounds. She was no longer just surviving, she was thriving, surrounded by care, laughter, and the unshakable bond of those who chose to stay. Thank you for sharing this journey with us. If you enjoyed Anna's story and the lessons it brought, please subscribe to Life Stories for more heartfelt tales that inspire, heal, and remind us of the power of love. See you in the next video.